Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, their friends and theirs. Have you ever thought about the importance of the time and state in which we read the Book of Allah? The Qur'an, this eternal miracle, should not be treated like any other text. Today we will explore 6 specific times when it is not recommended to read the Qur'an. These moments are often overlooked, but understanding them can transform our relationship with this sacred book. This is a blessed book which we have sent down to you, that they may meditate on its verses, and that those gifted with understanding may reflect. Surah Sad 38:29. 1. Never read the Qur'an in a state of major impurity, janaba. In Islam, purity is not limited to physical appearance. It extends to the heart, mind, and body, uniting these 3 elements in perfect harmony. The Qur'an, being the word of Allah, deserves that we approach it in a state of ultimate respect. This is why the notion of tahara, ritual purity, occupies a central place in our relationship with the sacred book. Janaba state is a major impurity that occurs after intimate intercourse or a wet dream. This state requires a total purification called ghusl before being able to perform acts of worship, including reading the Qur'an. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, clarified this rule to protect due respect for the Qur'an. He said, "Only a pure person can touch the Qur'an." Sunan al-Darimi 2:219. This hadith highlights the importance of preparing oneself spiritually before interacting with the Holy Book. This reminds us that reading the Qur'an is not a simple intellectual act, but a deep connection with Allah. One day, a companion came to consult the Prophet and asked him, "Should I recite the Qur'an if I am impure?" The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, calmly replied, "No, until you purify yourself." This moment is emblematic of the Prophet's pedagogy. He did not condemn, but taught with wisdom and kindness. By responding in this way, he showed that purification is not only an obligation, but a spiritual preparation which elevates our inner state to better receive the divine word. Purity is not a simple formality. It is the way to get closer to Allah, to transform our heart into a sanctuary where His words can fully resonate. When we neglect this aspect, we risk losing the very essence of the Qur'an, which is to guide our souls towards the light. Allah loves those who repent and those who purify themselves. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:22. This verse highlights that purification is a quality loved by Allah, which should inspire us to constantly watch over our spiritual and physical state before reading the Qur'an. Once upon a time there was a young man who lived in Medina during the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. This young man loved to recite the Qur'an, but one day, after finding himself in the state of janaba, he began to read the Holy Book without performing ghusl. A companion who was passing by said to him, "Have you forgotten that the Prophet taught us not to read the Qur'an in this state?" Taken with shame, the young man hastened to purify himself. Later he said, "This moment taught me that reading the Qur'an without respect is like drinking from a sacred spring with unclean hands. It changed me forever." This story illustrates that the teaching of this rule is not a constraint, but a reminder of the honor we owe to the Qur'an. Let's take a moment to think. How many times have we recited the Qur'an without really paying attention to our spiritual or physical state? It is not just about respecting rules, but cultivating an approach that values the word of Allah. Have you ever wondered if you fully respect this sacred book in all circumstances? Is the respect we have for the Qur'an visible in the way we prepare to read it? Before reading the Qur'an, let us remember that we are standing before the direct word of Allah, transmitted to guide humanity. This moment is sacred. If we have neglected this rule in the past, this is the opportunity to return to Him with sincerity. Those who, when they commit sin or wrong themselves, remember Allah and ask forgiveness for their sins. Surat Al-Imran 3:135. The Qur'an itself invites us to purify ourselves, not only physically but also in our intentions, in order to reconnect with Allah. Adopting this approach is more than an act of worship, it is a way of life. Purification then becomes a door to a deeper understanding of the Qur'an. By respecting these specific times when we should not read the Holy Book, we learn to value every interaction with Allah's Word and immerse ourselves in His infinite wisdom. 2. Do not read the Qur'an in an impure place. Imagine a precious pearl resting in your hands, shiny and pure. Would you put it in the mud or in a place full of noise and disorder? If this pearl is precious, what can we say about the Qur'an, the divine word, infinitely more precious than all the riches of this world? Approaching the Qur'an requires a pure environment, a space that honors its spiritual value. The Qur'an itself guides us in this reflection. And purify your clothes, and flee from all filthiness. Surah Al-Mudathir 74:4-5. These words, although simple, contain profound wisdom. They are not limited to physical cleanliness, but also evoke purity of spirit and place. Our environments shape our hearts and souls, and respect for the Qur'an begins with choosing a suitable place for its recitation. Imagine a pious man who every day prepared a corner of his house before reading the Qur'an. He carefully cleaned the space, lit a lamp to soften the atmosphere, and sat in absolute calm. One day, someone asked him why he never read the Qur'an when he was in the market or traveling, even if he had time. He replied serenely, "My heart must be at peace for His words to reach me. How can I connect to Allah if my mind is distracted or my surroundings are defiled?" This man understood that the purity of the place is an invitation to the divine presence. His gestures were a silent declaration of respect for the Qur'an, an acknowledgement of its sacredness. Let us take a moment to reflect on our own relationship with the Qur'an. Where do we choose to read it? Is it in a quiet corner, where the soul can fully open to divine light? Or is it in places where our thoughts are constantly being pulled in different directions? Where we read the Qur'an impacts our ability to meditate on its words. When we are surrounded by noise, chaos, or impurity, our hearts can become opaque, unable to grasp the depth of Allah's teachings. It is not the Qur'an that loses its value in such environments, but our own receptivity that diminishes. It is a glorious Qur'an, inscribed on a preserved tablet. Surat Al-Buruj 85:21-22. These verses remind us that the Qur'an is exalted, preserved in absolute purity. It is our duty to honor it by ensuring that the places where we read it reflect this exaltation. One day, a young man who lived in a busy neighborhood tried to read the Qur'an amid the incessant noise of the street. After several failed attempts, he realized that his thoughts were constantly wandering. An old imam advised him, "My son, look for a place where your mind can rest and your heart can open. Let the Qur'an enter your soul like a gentle breeze." This advice changed his life. He found a small corner in a nearby mosque where he could read in peace. He later said, "Each word of the Qur'an took on new depth when I read it in a pure place." This story teaches us that respect for the Qur'an is not limited to our intentions, but is reflected in our practical choices. Choosing a pure, calm, and clean place is an act of submission, a way of saying, "O Allah, I stand before you with all the honor I can offer." When was the last time you felt that the environment around you influenced your connection with the Qur'an? Have you ever noticed that certain places facilitate deeper understanding and more sincere meditation? We live in an age where noise and distractions are everywhere, yet it is possible to create sanctuaries of peace, even in the most modest places. A clean room, soft lighting, a sincere heart. These elements are enough to transform any space into a place where the Qur'an can fully resonate. and whoever honors the commandments of Allah, it comes from piety of heart. Surat Al-Hajj 22:32. This verse reminds us that the honor we give to the Qur'an reflects the depth of our faith. Creating a pure environment for reading the Qur'an is not a detail, but an act of worship in itself. So every time we open the Holy Book, let us take a moment to observe our surroundings. Does it live up to the divine word? If not, perhaps this is an opportunity to purify not only our place, but also our heart, in order to fully receive the blessings of the Qur'an. 3. Do not read the Qur'an while being distracted or inattentive. The Qur'an is much more than a book. It is a divine light, a sacred breath intended to nourish the soul. But if our minds are distracted, preoccupied with the affairs of this world, can this light truly reach our hearts? Reading the verses carelessly, mechanically, is like trying to fill a cracked container. The blessing slips, never taking root. Allah questions us in the Qur'an. Do they not meditate on the Qur'an, or are there padlocks on their hearts? Surah Muhammad 47:24. These words strike the soul as a powerful reminder. The Qur'an is not a simple recitation for the tongue, but a deep reflection for the heart. Every word, every letter carries infinite wisdom. But this wisdom cannot flourish in a lost mind. Imagine for a moment a scene. A young man, absorbed in his thoughts, absently leafing through the Qur'an. His voice recites the verses, but his heart wanders elsewhere, preoccupied with his affairs and responsibilities. Her grandfather, an elderly man with eyes full of wisdom, watches her silently. After a moment he approaches and gently places a hand on the young man's shoulder. With a gentle voice he said, "My son, why do you recite with your tongue what your heart does not hear? The Qur'an is not an obligation to be accomplished in haste. It is a treasure to be discovered, a companion that illuminates your darkness. Read for your heart, not just your tongue." These words, simple but profound, resonated in the mind of the young man. He realized that he had treated the Qur'an as just another task, forgetting that it was a key to opening the doors of divine mercy. From that day on, he changed his way of reading. He would sit in silence, breathe deeply, and concentrate entirely on the sacred words, as if they were being revealed to him for the first time. This story pushes us to question our own relationship with the Qur'an. How many times have we opened this sacred book with distracted intention? How many times have we recited words without feeling their impact? Let's take a moment to reflect on these words. It is a blessed book which we have sent down to you, that they may meditate on its verses, and that people of understanding may reflect. Surat Sad 38-29. The Qur'an invites us to meditate, to immerse ourselves in its teachings with attention and humility. But to meditate, we must first offer our mind a space of calm. Imagine that the Qur'an is a subtle melody. If your heart is cluttered with the noise of the world, how can you hear this divine melody? A pious man often said, "When I read the Qur'an, I am no longer in this world. I am in a dialogue with Allah, a conversation where each word carries an answer to my questions, a light for my doubts." Salun Tulsi. These words reflect a profound truth. To read the Qur'an is to make oneself fully present before Allah. But how to achieve this state of full presence? This requires inner preparation. Before opening the Qur'an, take a moment to calm your thoughts. Turn off distractions. Close the door to everyday concerns. Sit with the sincere intention of connecting to the word of Allah. How do you ensure your heart and mind are fully present when you open the Qur'an? Do you take the time to prepare your soul? Or do you let the concerns of the world follow you into this sacred moment? Allah has offered us the Qur'an as guidance, but this guidance requires receptivity. It's like rain falling on different types of soil. A rocky earth cannot absorb water, just as a distracted heart cannot receive the wisdom of the Qur'an. And we have certainly made the Qur'an easy for meditation. Is there anyone who can think? Surat Al-Qamar, 54:17. This verse reminds us that meditation on the Qur'an is an accessible act, but it requires sincere intention. When we read attentively, the Qur'an becomes an inexhaustible source of guidance and comfort. One day, an elderly woman said that she never read the Qur'an without taking a moment to think before starting. She said, "Before opening the book, I close my eyes and ask Allah, open my heart to your words. And each time, I feel a peace that I cannot describe." His testimony is a reminder that the Qur'an is a mirror. If your mind is foggy, the mirror will only reflect a blurry image. But if you approach the Qur'an with clarity and sincerity, it will reveal to you the treasures hidden in its verses. So, when you open the Qur'an, ask yourself this question: am I really here, present before Allah? If the answer is uncertain, take a moment to refocus your mind. Because the Qur'an is not a text to be read to accomplish a task, but a sacred encounter that nourishes the soul and illuminates life. 4. Do not read the Qur'an in a state of anger. Anger is like a fire that consumes the soul. If you read the Qur'an in anger, this fire risks distorting the divine message. And hasten to the forgiveness of your Lord and a paradise as vast as the heavens and the earth, prepared for the pious. Surat Al-Imran, 3:133. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Strength does not lie in defeating one's opponent, but in containing oneself in one's anger." Before reading the Qur'an, take time to calm your soul. When have you let anger dictate your actions? And how would it have been different if you had chosen serenity? 5. Do not read the Qur'an without ablution, wudu. Although it is not an obligation to recite the Qur'an from memory, holding the Book of Allah without ablution is not recommended. Wudu is a way of preparing one's body and mind to receive divine words, and no one touches the book except the purified. Surat Al-Waqi'ah, 56:79. A pious woman never touched the Qur'an without ablution, even if she had to wait for hours to purify herself. When asked why, she replied, "How can I approach the words of Allah without honoring His purity?" What is your routine to prepare yourself spiritually before reading the Qur'an? 6. Do not read the Qur'an while neglecting its meaning. The Qur'an is not just words, but a guide. Reading it without trying to understand its meaning is like missing a treasure without ever opening it. A book which we have sent down to you, full of blessing, that they may meditate on its verses, and that people of understanding may reflect. Surat Sad, 38:29. A man read the Qur'an every day but felt a void. When he began to meditate on the verses, he said, "It's like I've never read the Qur'an before." Do you take time to meditate on the meanings of the verses you read, or do you recite them only out of habit? Dear brothers and sisters, the Qur'an is light, guidance, and mercy. But to reap its benefits, we must approach it with respect, purity, and intention. These 6 moments are not prohibitions, but reminders to elevate ourselves spiritually. Today, how will you change your approach to the Qur'an to better honor the word of Allah? God bless us and guide us. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.